Are you trying to figure your plan out? I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and thanks for listening to the Parable Podcast. Joining me today is Executive Director and soon-to-be author, Dee Cook. For a long time, Dee wondered where she was going to fit into God's plan, but God spoke to her heart right on the mission field.
But it's different when you see with your own eyes, when you smell with your own nose, when you touch the people with your own hands and experience something for yourself. It's different. And I was broken. I was angry. And people would say to me, "Oh, did you have a nice holiday?" And I would want to punch them. I'm like, do you realize what's happening around the world? You know, we live in such a bubble in Western society.
Here's my conversation with Dee Cook. Welcome back to the Parable Podcast. I'm Danielle Zapchenk, and today I am thrilled for you to meet my new friend, Dee Cook. Dee, welcome to the Parable Podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Dee, tell me, what are you passionate about these days? What gets you going every single day?
My life, my family, my work. I have lots of things that I'm very grateful for. And life is different today than it has been over the last few years. I moved to Canada 2.5 years ago. So I'm from England. Every day of my life is very different right now to what it was a couple of years ago. So it still feels like I'm on an adventure. So just everyday life gets me up in the morning.
Absolutely. Well, that's good. That's a good thing to get you up every day. What was the trajectory change for you coming from England to Canada?
Yeah, so my husband and I were pastoring a church in England and came to a point where we felt that God had another adventure for us, and our church was ready for the next generation to take it on. So we handed it on, and an opportunity opened up here in Saskatoon in Canada. And so we moved over here, and yeah, so it was a real massive move. I've only ever lived in England before, so I'm not particularly a globetrotter. I've traveled for sure, but not to live anywhere different. So it's been a big shift in following the leading of the Lord. We've done it with very much the mindset of, you know, when God brings you somewhere, then that's where you stay. Yeah. Unless he says otherwise. And he's, not said otherwise. And we're enjoying life here. It's not been easy, but that's okay. Yeah. Settling into a new country is always a challenge. So it's good. We're glad we came. And we have 3 kids. 2 of them are here with us. And we left one in England. The joke is we don't love her, so we left her, but that's absolutely not true. That's my husband's joke, not mine. No, she's at university in England. She's about to finish. So the question is whether she'll join us here or not. She's not sure. So we miss her a lot, but we have our other 2 kids here with us, and they're settled in really well. Yeah. What is one of the things that you really miss about England? Oh my goodness. At the moment, this might sound silly, but brick houses and just everyday things in the supermarket. Some stores have a British section. And if I stand in front of the British section and kind of put my hands up so I ignore the rest of the store, I can pretend I'm in England and I'm looking at all of my favorite things. Might sound ridiculous, but that's just the days when I feel a bit homesick. But this is home now here, so we're very purposeful that, we want to make this home and not be longing for what was, because we need to be fully present where we are, and we are, so it's good. For just being in Canada for the last 2 years, how has it been building community, building relationships, new friendships for you? It's, in some ways, it's been fairly straightforward, but in other ways, not quite so easy. We were pastoring a church, and my husband was here, and that actually came to an end just this last spring. So we ended up having to leave that church community and find a different one. So our friendships, some of them shifted, some of them stayed, which was nice. But I guess one thing when you move countries is that the friendships that you had that have stories attached to them or have memories attached to them or that you've counted on for decades, they're not there physically. So new friends are amazing, but they're not deep until you've spent significant time together and built memories together. So I guess the last 2 years have been trying to create memories with people and create those depths of friendships that you crave. And especially when things are tough, you just crave to sit down with someone with a coffee and, you know, someone that you've known for years and years. So that's hard, but we do have some great friends here now and starting to see some depth in those friendships. So that's really good.
I think adult friendships can be really challenging because you're right. You want to root down deep right away, but there is jobs, people, places, just time commitments that get in the way. And I was having a conversation a while ago with my friend Carrie, and I was saying like there are these memories or these like moments that your friendship is like created in your brain. And I don't even know if that makes any sense, but you have like these memories that like hold a friendship together that you think about from time to time, and that it just like it builds. So it's a process. Can you think back? Who was your like first true friend?
Ever?
Yeah.
Oh, Jacqueline Folder. We met because our parents had us around about the same time, and we met in playgroup when we were like tiny. And we were best friends growing up. Like we went to school together, hung out together, did things after school together. We both went to separate high schools and then moved away separately to different universities. So our friendship was not as close over the years, but then we got back in touch again. Probably 6 years ago, and rekindled our friendship. Still other side of the world from each other. Aww. Yeah, I've had some really good chats with her. Yeah, so that was my first ever best friend.
Oh, that's sweet. When you think back to those days of being friends with Jacqueline, what was something about you as a child that you were super excited about? What do you remember about being that age?
Oh my goodness. I'm a very imaginative person. So just anything to do with fairy tales and telling stories, writing stories, talking about all of the things that we love as little girls. That was where it was at for me. Our house was always full of books, and my mom was an avid fairy tale reader, so we used to kind of read a lot of those together. So dressing up, imaginative play, all those things, that for sure was what I really enjoyed.
Do you think of yourself now, looking at yourself as an adult, do you feel like you still have that imagination about you when you look at the world?
For sure. And I think it's been through different phases, probably some seasons of life where life's taken over a bit, and I haven't had as much opportunity to have brain space to imagine and think. And certainly those times we get distracted by, I don't know, social media, TV or whatever, you know, it's easy to not have times where you think deeply. But I think I've probably rekindled over the last couple of years a real passion for imaginative stories again. Yeah, I loved like Narnia and all of those types of books when I was young. So stories that had almost like a real place attached to them, although they were imaginative, they were what really absorbed my attention. So I was a teacher for a while of young children, so that was always my favorite part of the day. We'd be telling stories at the end of the day. If I can get into a really good, long story with them, that was always my favorite thing to do.
Well, that's kind of interesting. So Dee and I connected through Women Speakers Collective, and through one of our coaching calls, you and a couple of the other ladies, you guys are working on a book. So this is just, it's connecting to me, the fact that you just love imagination and that stories and reading. And so you and these other ladies are working on a project right now. Can you share a little bit about what you guys are being inspired by?
Yeah, so we came together with a desire to have or to write a children's devotional book, or something that can really speak to helping young girls to recognize that they have a voice and they can use it for the good. So we got together, and over a series of Zoom calls, we decided on the type of book that we wanted to write. It's something that's allegorical, so it's talking about the journey towards God, but it's written in a way that is not overtly Christian, so that it could appeal to a secular market too, and hopefully a school's curriculum. It's very values-based, and it enables the reader to read, an adult reader to read with a child, have one chapter a day to work through. So there's a storyline all the way through the book. I won't give it away too much. Okay. And there's also discussion questions and an activity to do the following day. And it just teaches really good values to young children in how to recognize their voice, recognize their inner voice, voices from other people, which voices are good, which ones are not so good, and how to use them to help other people, to benefit other people.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting.
That's amazing. Dee, when do you think for you, did you recognize your voice? Was that younger, or is it something that you had to grow into?
I definitely had to grow into it. I am a naturally fairly quiet personality. And I was the youngest of 4 in my family. My parents were missionaries before I was born. Then when I was born, they pastored a church in Manchester in Northern England. And so I was always the baby of the family and very much the quieter one. And probably often felt like I didn't have as much to contribute, should we say. And so throughout my life, that was a big journey to discovering what my voice is, whether my voice is valid, whether I even had anything interesting for people to listen to. But yet within that, I always had a burning desire in me to make a difference somehow in this world. And so twists and turns of life and learning and mistakes and then learning from those, all these different things shape you, don't they? And they help you to realize what your voice is and what your message, I guess, is, and how that can really benefit other people. So for sure, it's been a tricky thing. And I wouldn't say that I'm the most out there of people. I'm confident in who I am for sure now. I'm 50, so I should be. Just, I guess, finding myself with opportunities to speak to people is always a privilege. Yeah,
it's a journey of figuring out what that voice is. Do I have one? Which I believe everybody does. And recognizing that whatever your voice and your story is, that it matters. Like there's purpose, there's something throughout that. And I guess that's why I love Jesus's parables. I love the way he tells a story and he draws us in. And so I'd love to hear one of your parable stories today, Dee, of just how God has taught you a lesson throughout your life.
So, as I said, my parents were missionaries before I was born, and then they were in Thailand, and they settled back in the UK, and then I was born, and so I grew up in a home that was full of love, full of Jesus, and moved away, went to university, got married, was teaching. Then my husband and I planted a church and were pastoring for a while. And I guess I always had an interesting journey with knowing really where I fit, struggling a bit to know what my purpose was. I knew that God gives everybody purpose. There's a reason why we're all here on this planet. And there's that old phrase, isn't there, that the 2 most important times of your life, the first one when you are put here, the second one when you figure out why you were put here. And so I had planned to go on a missions trip to Tanzania in Africa with a couple of friends in church. There was an organization that we were supporting there, and they were doing a 3-week missions trip. So I went, and I can honestly say that this thing woke up in me while I was there that I had not realized was in me, but obviously was in seed form. And when I was there, I realized that even though I'd never been part of my parents' missionary season, I wasn't there, but I grew up with all their stories. It was when I was actually in a situation on a missions trip that suddenly this thing woke up in me, and it became this absolutely burning fire. And I came back from that trip completely changed. And that can sometimes sound, and when people say things like that, they can sound quite glossy and, they can romanticize it. But if I can explain it like this, I was a broken person when I came back from that trip. I was angry. I cried for months. I guess I'd heard stories of, abject poverty and people living in difficult situations. I'd grown up with those stories. I'd watched all of the missionary movies. My parents, used to love those types of movies and books about missionaries. And so I knew that the world had areas that were very difficult. But it's different when you see with your own eyes, when you smell with your own nose, when you touch the people with your own hands and experience something for yourself. It's different. And I was broken. I was angry. And people would say to me, "Oh, did you have a nice holiday?" And I would want to punch them. Like, do you realize what's happening around the world? We live in such a bubble in Western society. And so that breaking was the beginning of what God wanted to, I guess, grow in me, this desire to step into conversations, to step into people's world that were living in difficult situations. And so I guess, and I for sure say, like, I can measure my life as two halves. One half was before I went on that trip. The second half of my life was after that trip. And I'm two very different people. Like I said, it wasn't glossy, it wasn't romantic, it was awful, it was hard, it broke me, but something important came from that breaking. And I think God does that sometimes. He breaks us in a way that he needs us to rebuild, maybe shake the foundations that we thought our life was built on, so that we can actually realize that we need a stronger foundation, or maybe he wants to birth something new in us. And so I guess throughout my life after then, I got involved in social justice projects that we were running in our church. We were pastoring, my husband and I, in England at that point. So I did some volunteering with the A21 campaign, which is against human trafficking. We got very involved in compassion, child sponsorships. We actually then planted a church out of our church in that same city that I went to. My husband went there a couple of years later. He felt the same as I did. And so we planted a location of our church in that same city, and went backwards and forwards, quite a lot over the years. After then, got to know people really well over there. And so I guess, my passion from then on was, how can I step in and help people that are really struggling, particularly women, watching women and mums really struggling to create a life for their families. And so I guess when my husband and I were looking at moving here to Canada, I was looking for work because the church that brought us over here only had a job for my husband. So I had two things that I really felt like, if I'm going to find a job, I wanted to have two things. First of all, I wanted to have purpose in that job, something that's about helping people. And secondly, I wanted to be able to openly talk about Jesus. And so I was sent a job advert for the job that I currently have, and it's the executive director of a pregnancy care centre, and I was able to get that job, and I can honestly say it's a huge part of my outworking, what God did in me all of those years ago, to have a real focus and a filter that I see the world through of how can I help people that are struggling.
I like that you said the word filter, because I think we go through our world, and if we want to put on a certain filter, we can, or we didn't even know it existed. So when you said that you came home and you were broken and you're angry and you cried, were you upset with the injustice that you were seeing? Were you upset with God? Like, how does this happen? What was the turmoil going on for you?
I've always known that God's good. I grew up with a very strong sense that my parents put in me, that God is good no matter what we encounter. But it was the injustice of, how can we be living in ignorance in some ways? How can we be living in this world where we just go about our daily life? We grab a coffee if we want. We go to the supermarket, buy whatever we want. We take things for granted. How can we be living like this when there are people who not only can't do that, but they have no choices about their life? And, over the years we've seen, I guess part of my working at this was I did a master's in international development, just to really learn good practice, not great practice, to learn about poverty, to learn about what creates the issues that we see, to try and unpack a bit, I guess, of what is this? Is this just me feeling sorry for people? Or is this God calling me to step into something that is about speaking into a situation or helping people. And I wasn't sure. And I don't think we always know detail of God's calling. You know, he calls us. Sometimes he's a bit specific, sometimes he's not. And for me, he wasn't. But I guess going back to that anger, it was, maybe I was angry at myself too for not having ever thought beyond my own context and maybe realizing how selfish I'd been or what a selfish life I'd lived, focused on me and my bubble.
Well, I think that is beautiful. The focus shifted. Like there's a lot of people that can just stay in that anger or it dissipates once. That's sometimes the problem with missions trips where we're just like, oh, we're here, we're going to work, and then we leave it and then it's done. There is no action beyond that. And so I think that's great that you had that time to process and like, how can I be a part of that? And I think for a lot of us, we're kind of like, well, what do I do? You're in Manchester and now how do I help in Tanzania? But I think that can look, whether that's in Tanzania or our neighbor, it can look very differently. It's just being open to that. You know, what would be some of the first steps to, if we feel that injustice within us, how do we step into that?
Very prayerfully. And I think there can be a lot of damage done by jumping in and doing what we think needs to be done.
Yeah.
And not actually looking into situations with more questions than answers. One thing that my master's taught me was there'll always be more layers than we realize. There'll always be more questions to anything than answers. So, you know, I think if anyone has this desire in them to help people, for sure, there are people around the corner from where we live in our backyard that will be going through something that really could do with someone asking, how are you doing? Can I help in any way? And you know, you're right, the anger, if that stays angry, then what that does is it builds walls between us and people. And that's the opposite of what should happen. We need to build bridges so that we can actually step into, you know, somebody's context and ask how we can be a help to them. Not assume anything and not certainly come with answers, but come with a questioning, curious heart of, you know, how can I walk alongside you? What do you need from me? And I've got many people in my world right now who need a friend. I've got a friend that I'm walking through her cancer journey with her right now. She has stage 4 cancer that's metastasized and she's going through horrible treatment right now. And she just needs someone to take her to the hospital now and then and sit with her during her oncologist appointments. You know, those things are as important as getting on a plane and going somewhere else in another part of the world. In fact, from where I am right now, that's more important because she's been placed in my life. And I know that, you know, when we meet anyone, that's a gift that we've met them. And so knowing that a gift comes with responsibility, then what does God want me to do with this gift and this responsibility? So for sure, our own backyard is the most important place to do any kind of loving on people and caring for people.
Dee, as you look back during that initial season, as you got your master's, as your church connected with the people in Tanzania, what was something that you're like, wow, I didn't expect this to come out of it?
Something that was a nice surprise was that I realized that God doesn't give one person a vision and leave it with that one person. He attaches other people to those visions too.
Wow.
And life is meant to be lived and shared with the community and with people. And so when one person has a passion for something, to have a community and to have other people that either already have that passion or that can ignite something in somebody else, I think that was something that I was pleasantly surprised about, and how many other people got on board with the need to step beyond their own bubble, like I've said, beyond their own thoughts of their life and think more of other people. And there's been many people since then that I've talked to that they equally have that same, oh, you too type of conversation. And it's amazing that God, you know, he doesn't want us to journey by ourselves when we're fulfilling his purposes. And some very specific things might be an alone season for a season, but it wouldn't be forever.
Yeah.
There's always someone else attached to that vision too.
When you said like the words you too, you were talking about earlier about knowing where I fit in. And I think so many of us, whether that's in different seasons of our life, we ask that question, like, what am I doing here? We could look at pages and pages of Instagram, or we could read people's life stories, and you're like, well, we see only the high parts. We see only like, wow, they figured out their purpose and they're doing it and they're accomplishing their goals. Sometimes we can just be a little weary because we wonder, am I even stepping into the calling that God is laying before me? What would be your encouragement to somebody who necessarily feels that, where I don't know where I fit in? I've prayed about it. I don't necessarily see it. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say just keep pursuing Jesus, because the journey towards Jesus has enriching moments in it. And on the pursuit of Jesus, we then along the journey often find people who ignite something within us. I didn't know what would happen to me when I went on that trip to Tanzania for the first time. I had no idea that would change me or do anything in me. And I think if we're looking for an earth-shattering experience all the time, we'll miss it, because we'll actually miss the smaller opportunities that have more purpose to them than the ones that we assume do. And sometimes we can be looking at the big significance and big platforms and the desires to do all of these big things, forgetting that those things don't land in our lap. The conversations with one person on one day, they're often the most life-changing things. They're often the times that create an opportunity that we could never have guessed. So just be diligent with every conversation. Yeah. And when you're talking with someone or you're going somewhere, always be giving that to Jesus and asking him, how can I pursue a closer relationship with you through this interaction or through this journey right now? And he'll for sure put the right things in our way at the right time when we're ready for them.
Absolutely. We celebrated my grandmother's life recently. She was just about to turn 102 years old. And as I was watching my mom give her eulogy, which we've gone over like 100 times, there wasn't like, and here's the Nobel Prize winner, and here is like all of these great accomplishments. But truly, there was such meaning to her life, people that shared that with her. All these experiences that maybe there isn't really like a tangibleness to it, like it was a moment. And so I think if we can hold that space and be reminded, like we have all been a part of something that has helped someone else or shown love and care and kindness, and maybe stood up to injustice in just a single moment, like it mattered. As you think about now your job that you currently have as the executive director of this pregnancy center, I was thinking about you the other night because we were watching the show as a family, and the son of this family, he got a girl pregnant, and the family goes to church and they were kind of excommunicated. And it's just like, it's so sad, because I think that as a church, you want to love people where they are, no matter what they've gone through. And unfortunately, that is not always the case. And then they end up where you are, Dee, where they're looking for family. They're just looking for somebody to support them. What has been the greatest challenge that you've seen as women have walked into your pregnancy center?
Yeah, I think often the biggest challenge is it's people's assumptions sometimes, or people's judgments of what people should do in a particular situation until you're in that situation, or until it's your daughter or your sister that's in that situation. And unfortunately, we do find that many churches are missing the opportunity of walking alongside someone because of fear of the person coming forward and asking for help, but fear of judgment from the community. We actually have been addressing that lately. We've been working with some of the pastors in our city and doing some events where we've been training them a little bit in how to have those difficult conversations with people who are in that situation. But the people that walk through our doors, they're often in such a crisis in their life that they're looking for kindness, they're looking for information, obviously, about, what their options are, but it's who is going to listen to me right now? Yeah. Who's going to take the time to, rather than judge who I am because I've got into this situation, but who's going to actually walk alongside of me and care for me regardless? We all make choices that aren't great in life. We all have done things that we wish we hadn't, for sure. And the fear of talking to somebody about that can be debilitating.
Yeah.
And the bravery it takes for someone to actually step up and say, I actually need some help here. That first step is the bravest step. And to be able to then be with someone through that journey of figuring things out, it's a privilege, but it's a brave one for people, for sure. Yeah.
Well, gosh, Dee, I appreciate that you are in that space, that you've come from that moment of like change where God says, like, this is the call that I have on your life. I need you to see that. And from Tanzania until now, just how God is continually using that, using your voice to showcase that story, giving people hope and know that they matter. So thank you so much for that. If people wanted to connect with you, how can they do that?
I'm on Instagram, and it's just simply Dee Cook on Instagram, Facebook too. So yeah, sure, that'd be really nice to connect with people that way.
Yeah, we'll put all of Dee's information in today's show notes. So Dee, thank you so much for helping us understand how we fit into God's bigger story and sharing your parable with us today.
Yeah, and thank you for creating a space for these stories to be shared. They're really important. So you're very much appreciated, Danielle.
Hey, I'm so grateful for Dee's story. We all wrestle with the reality of, is the story that I have, is it enough? Am I in the right spot? Or maybe have I missed it altogether? Sometimes it's in the mundane. Sometimes it's in the day-to-day that we just have to look up and realize that God has us right where we want. To connect with Dee, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Dee. Number 1, are you questioning where you fit? Like Dee said, please just be prayerful about your next steps, or maybe you need to realize what is already before you in the people and the places and the position that you have right now. Number 2, who in your life is God calling you to help those around you create life and know that they matter? One easy way you can support the Parable Podcast is simply by sharing this episode with a friend. If you could pass that along today, that really helps people find out about these amazing parable stories. And a huge thank you to my gifted husband, Eric, for his editing expertise. That is going to do it for today. I'm grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your parable showcases how God knows exactly where you fit. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.